Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Kristin Harmel.
And I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, and librarians. On this episode, we are thrilled to welcome David Baldacci to discuss his new novel, To Die For. The book was just released on November 12th, and we are so excited to speak to David about it.
But first, we have a quick reminder to check out all the fun things going on in our Friends and Fiction community at friendsandfiction.com.
So there you'll find our show schedule, details on upcoming in-person events, and links to our bookshop.org page, to the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa, to our merch store, and to our newsletter sign-up. In other words, if you want to know more about anything Friends and Fiction offers, and we offer a lot, be sure to check out friendsandfiction.com.
Please also check out our Friends and Fiction Endless Stories newsletter on Substack. You can read all our free weekly posts on the Substack website or app. And if you subscribe, and we really hope you will, each new post will land in your inbox so you never miss a thing. The basic newsletter is free, but for paid subscribers, we offer incredible extra content, including deeper dives with all of our weekly show guests, plus monthly roundtable discussions between the 4 of us and our author friends, like the one I just ran with 5 thriller writers about why we like to scare people.
I loved that.
And people like to be scared. We also recently hosted an Ask Me Anything session where paid subscribers hopped on with us before the show in a private Zoom, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We'll be announcing more VIP Zoom sessions soon, available only to paid Substack subscribers. It's hard to say.
You know, it's a tongue twister.
Yes. The paid subscription is just $5 a month. And as a reminder, if you enjoyed tuning into our Friends and Fiction interviews, this is a great way you can support us for basically the cost of a cup of coffee. And you can always start free and upgrade. Check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com.
All right. Now, without any further ado, let's welcome our friend, David Baldacci. David has been writing since childhood, when his mother gave him a lined notebook in which to write down his stories. He published his first novel, Absolute Power, in 1996. The feature film adaptation followed, with Clint Eastwood as its director and star, and I loved that movie.
In total, David has published 50 novels for adults. All have been national and international bestsellers, and several have been adapted for film and television. His novels are published in over 45 languages and in more than 80 countries, with 150 million copies sold worldwide. Now, David has also published 7 novels for young readers.
David and his family live in Virginia. A lifelong Virginian, David received his bachelor's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University and his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law, after which he practiced law in Washington, D.C. In addition to being a prolific writer, David is a devoted philanthropist, and his greatest efforts are dedicated to his family's Wish You Well Foundation. Established by David and his wife, Michelle, the Wish You Well Foundation supports family and adult literacy programs in the United States.
In his 12th novel, To Die For, which was just released on November 12th, the 620 man returns. This time, he's been sent to the Pacific Northwest to aid in a complicated FBI case, and he's about to come face to face with his nemesis, the girl on the train.
All right, can you bring David on?
Hello, guys.
Fantastic. Hi, David. So
Hey,
nice
David.
to see you.
Good to see you. Friends and fiction, 2 of my favorite things. So this
Oh,
is nice.
thanks.
Well, welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. We are so glad to have you. Now, To Die For, the latest in your popular 620 Man series, is centered around the fascinating character of Travis Devine, So called because when we met him in your 2022 thriller, The 620 Man, he boarded the 620 commuter train to Manhattan each day until the death of a former girlfriend reawakened old secrets related to his past in the U.S. Army. Now, in this latest installment, Divine, now an agent with the Department of Homeland Security, takes on a mission in the Pacific Northwest that again relates to his dangerous past and includes a woman hell-bent on murdering him in cold blood. Can you tell us a little bit more about the fascinating character of Travis and about what we can expect from To Die For?
Yeah, Divine, I came up with the Divine. I was riding my bike one day and I just read the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers about $30 trillion of dark money floating around the world. And they were fascinating journalistic effort. They were done by an international consortium of journalists. So I thought, what would I do if I had $30 trillion in dark money? So they didn't answer that question. So I tried to answer it in the 620 Man. And Travis Divine was my guy to sort of inhabit that world. And I came up with him because I wanted to take a guy who had been in a world he loved, the military. And he was Crackerjack Army Ranger. And then something happened in the military that forced him to leave and give up something he loved. And he left under a dark cloud. And he went to work on Wall Street as punishment for himself because he hates that world. He hates money making. He hates everything that stands for, but it was sort of his penance. So this is this very damaged guy with lots of personal baggage. And I love to write about those characters. And now is sort of being forced to live in this new world of working for Homeland Security and being all around the world, trying not to get killed and trying to get his mission accomplished. So he goes to the Pacific Northwest with the girl on the train still after him. We found out about her in the second novel, The Edge, and she's still out there. His job is pretty simple. He's going to protect this 12-year-old girl, Betsy Odom. Her parents had just died. Her uncle is this global criminal who's being prosecuted by the federal government. He wants to adopt her. Nobody knows why. And Travis is supposed to go out there and protect her. Now, he has a great skill set. He's got lots of things he can do. He is absolutely clueless about 12-year-old girls. And so that was, I love that sort of generational thing because I wanted to see, okay, tough guy, I'm going to throw you up against a 12-year-old girl who's probably far tougher than you'll ever even think of being. And let's see what you can do.
I was thinking about this, David. You don't see a lot of sleuths who are Homeland Security agents. Have you done any research on that? Has anybody else done that?
Yeah, so DHS is the biggest circus tent there is in Washington. And so they have lots of sub-agencies, lots of people, lots of, little clusters of agents out there doing lots of different things. I invented this Office of Special Projects for Travis Divine, but I know a number of DHS agents, and they have a big mission statement, let's just put it that way, to protect this country against all enemies, foreign or domestic. And I wanted to have him be in that because one, he didn't enroll in Homeland Security school. He didn't go through the normal channels you would do like you were an FBI agent, but he had the skill set to do that. So that was one easy way to sort of make him a federal agent without him actually going through all the training and all that. Because at times in the novel, I needed him to be able to show the badge and carry the gun and all that stuff. So I wanted to get over that hurdle so I wouldn't get a lot of emails saying, that's impossible, that could never happen. I'm like, if you read the newspapers, anything is possible these days. So I can write about anything I want to write about. So that's why I chose Homeland Security as opposed to something like the FBI and the CIA, where things would have been a little dicier to sort of throw him into that.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. The boundaries are more permeable. So
well, they really are, and DHS gets into everything. They work with every other agency. They have a huge footprint. Lots of other agencies that we know about are under their umbrella. It seemed like the best place. I talked to some of my friends who work for some of the alphabet agencies, and they were like, "Yeah, if you want to do something like that, just stick them in DHS. It's entirely plausible." And I'm like, "That's cool. I love that. Stick them in DHS. I'm going to get a T-shirt that says that."
Well, we would be remiss if we didn't ask you the question that we love to ask all of our guests. You've told us about the books, what the book's about, but what's it really about at its core? Or maybe what is the 620 Man series about at its core? Or do you think we've already figured that out?
I love people in life who have been knocked on their butt. And then they have to get up and somehow keep going day after day. I've done that with my Amos Decker, the Memory Man series, my Atlee Pine FBI agent. And with Divine, I wanted to see what I like to do with books like this. I want to take a character and put them in a really difficult situation and see if they can make it through. And here's a guy who's, if you think about it, he's having to spend his life doing something that is not his first love. This is not really how he wanted to spend his life. But he's a dedicated guy and a disciplined soldier. And so he's doing what he's ordered to do. Doesn't mean he's actually ecstatic or happy about it. And I think that translates to a lot of people in life. You know, we get up and we go do a job we may not like, it's a paycheck, and we get our happiness from other things, friends and family and sports and all the other stuff. But I like having characters where people who read about them can have a connection to them
Yeah.
somehow. You know, not
Right.
everybody's going to be an agent flying around with a gun and a badge, but they do know about the challenge of getting out of bed every day and going to do a job that they may not like. And I also like Divine because he's tenacious as hell, and he gets thrown into lots of different things. He's not like a detective in a town where it's going to be a murder investigation and the same sort of hoops are going to have to be jumped through, and you're going to have to interview people and investigate and gain clues. He's thrown in these situations with not a lot of backup, not a lot of help. And sometimes he's not really sure what he's supposed to do. He's just got to figure it out. And I think a lot of people can relate to that as well in their working life and also their personal life. You get thrown into something and you just got to figure it out.
Well, speaking of Divine having to figure out something that he's thrown into, you briefly mentioned the 12-year-old Betsy Odom. Could you talk a little bit about the decision to include that? I feel like we saw more character growth from Travis in this novel than I
Yeah.
expected, and it's directly because of her. Can you talk a little bit about choosing to have him face that challenge and what that meant for him?
For writing a series, writing a standalone book is like a movie. It's a 2-hour movie, one and done. You don't have to worry about involving a character except
Yep.
within the span of the movie. With a series, you have an opportunity to again and again and again raise that character arc to another level. And
Yeah.
one reason I put Betsy Odom in the way that I did was as a foil to make him grow as a character.
Yep.
And she did that admirably. In many scenes, he is absolutely scared to death. He's clueless. He doesn't know what to say. He's stammering. He doesn't want to, make a volatile situation even more volatile.
Yeah.
I raised, a daughter, she's 31 now, but she was 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16. And trust me, I know all of those times. And I also know that as a man, I grew a lot in ways that I didn't necessarily expect just because I had to deal with her, work with her, love her, discipline her sometimes, teach her, and then she taught me in many
Yeah.
ways. So you're absolutely right. Betsy, who, by the way, Betsy was a charity auction winner named from Amelia Island, Florida. So Betsy Odom, I met with her when I was down a few weeks ago to do another event. Betsy's in her I think, late 60s, delightful person. And she goes, "So my character's coming out." I said, "Yes." And she goes, "So can you tell me a little bit about her?" I said, "Well, she's a little younger than you are,
A little bit.
but she's awesome, just like you are."
Well,
Oh.
yeah, maybe we'll run into Betsy because the four of us from Friends in Fiction, we're going to be down at Amelia Island Literary Festival, the fall luncheon next week. And that brings me to this question. Can you talk a little bit about your fierce support for organizations such as the Amelia Island Book Festival and your own foundation, the Wish You Well for Literacy? And why is it so important to you to make sure that everybody has access to words and stories?
If I could put this in one defining moment, I would say that books teach one incredible thing. I grew up in Virginia during Jim Crow, and I grew up surrounded by racists and racism. And I couldn't turn that very differently than I did. And the one thing that saved me and my brother and sister, our parents took us to the library every week. And I like to say that I traveled the world without a plane ticket or a passport. The thing about what we're seeing a lot about now is ignorance and intolerance go hand in hand. Intolerance is like a cancer. Ignorance is its blood supply. If you get rid of the blood supply to a cancer, what happens to it? Well, it dies. If you get rid of ignorance, intolerance will die. And ignorance is always based on the other. The other person doesn't look like us. We should be afraid of them. Now, you will meet more people reading books than you ever will in your real life. And you'll meet
Yeah.
people from places you will probably never go in your whole life, different countries. And you can go in books, places you can never go in real life, which is like the past or the future. So for me, reading teaches the number one attribute I think if I had a magic wand, I would wish and bestow in abundance on every human being, and that attribute is empathy, because empathy leads to all the best human attributes, and conversely, the lack of empathy leads to all the worst human attributes that we have. So when you make people readers, what you're actually doing is not just so they can enjoy my book or your book on the beach, you're making them better people. And in turn, that will make the entire world better. So it sounds small, but actually, what we're trying to do to get more people to read at a higher level is to make them actually better people. They'll be more curious, more intelligent, more educated, more literate, better able to think, less prejudicial. Mark Twain used to say that travel was fatal to prejudice because he traveled the world as a man, and he was the most traveled person of his generation. I didn't have an opportunity to travel, but all of us have an opportunity to travel the world just by going down to the library and picking out some books.
No, that's such a good point. Yeah. And it's so important to get books into the hands of people because you're teaching them, not just to open this book and travel into the world of this book, but to discover the whole world of books out there, to discover a joy of reading, which
Yes,
does, like you said, make people better.
it does. I mean, I get it. I really do think that it saved me because my entire world growing up was completely segregated.
Yeah.
And
Mine
I
too.
yeah. And I would, as a child, as an 8-year-old boy, I would go down Monument Avenue in a car with my parents and see all the Confederate generals. And as an 8-year-old boy, you see a 60-foot tall bronze statue of a guy on a horse, and you think, what is an 8-year-old boy going to think? Wow, that must have been a great man who did great things. And
Yeah.
as a 21-year-old in college, I would, with a lot of learning and reading behind me, I would pass those same statues. And I remember Jeb Stuart's statue on Monument Avenue. It said he died for his country. And I remember looking at that plaque one day and thinking, what country was that? I wonder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
look at this one, but that's the difference between
Absolutely.
reading and not reading. It gives you context and perspective. It gives you a foundation upon which you can make future decisions.
That's so well put. I think it goes without saying that you have done a tremendous amount to use your platform for good. You have a huge platform. You've written all these books and you've done a lot of good with them. But the good you do is not just through the literary organizations you work closely with. I think you've also written books that make us think deeply about the world and our place in it, such as one of my personal favorites, A Calamity of Souls, which came out earlier this year. Would you mind telling us briefly about that book and what inspired it? Because I think it actually connects to what you were just talking about.
It very much does. I started writing Calamity of Soul on Christmas Day in 2012 when my wife gave me a journal. And as you know, do not give a writer blank paper on a major holiday because you'll never see them again for the rest of the day. And I remember sitting down, opening the journal. I wrote A Calamity of Souls. That title just came to me from wherever. And I wrote the first 150 pages in that journal by hand. And then I typed it up and then I set it aside because I wasn't really sure if it was relevant anymore. It was very autobiographical. It's set in Virginia in the 60s, 1968, which is a pivotal year in this country's history. When a lot of people in 1968 thought this was the last year of America. I mean, Martin Luther King was killed, Bobby Kennedy was killed, the Vietnam War was raging. There were riots all over the country. It was not a great year for this country. So I would continue to go back to it year after year and look at it and go, wow, do I have the bandwidth, the resolve, the determination to finish this? And then, like 6 or 7 years ago, the world seemed to be getting crazy again. And I remember reading the first few chapters and I thought, well, if I didn't tell you it was 1968, you might assume it was today, you know?
Wow.
So I decided it was still relevant. So I went back and finished it. And what I wanted to do in this novel, aside from great works like To Kill a Mockingbird or Time to Kill, um, this is a book for me of unity because I see the challenges we face as a country is not being capable of being solved by one segment of society only. You have to have a unified voice. And so when you first start reading Calamity, it's a courtroom drama. A black man is accused of killing an elderly white couple, a young white lawyer, a male. Who's never done a case like this before. Through serendipity, decides he's going to do this case. And I know people thinking, okay, here's Atticus Finch 2.0, right? And that's not what I wanted to do with this novel.
No.
So he's totally out of his depth. And he's going to be destroyed in this case. He doesn't have the skill to do this. And then out of the blue, here comes a woman, Desiree DuBose, a black woman, who is by far the finest attorney in this entire novel. And she and Jack work together to try to bring this to a conclusion that, speaks to justice. My parents had huge families. So I had 17 aunts, you know. on both sides. And I saw women who were talented and ambitious and could have done spectacular things in their lives, and none of them achieved their potential because the ceiling back then wasn't glass, it was concrete with
Yeah.
rebar. And that has always stayed with me. It's one reason I write about strong, independent women in all my novels. I know how strong and independent women had to be to survive those times and survive today, quite frankly. They have to work 3 times as hard to get to the same level. So Desiree DuBose, and I made a promise to my daughter, who's actually now in law school, this was not going to be a white savior book. That was not my intent, was not my purpose. And this is going to be a people coming together sort of novel. But I also want people to know that as you read the novel, this is not a neatly tied gift with a bow on top. This is not going to be, home sweet home, white picket fence ending. This is going to be a realistic ending showing that, okay, we had one small victory, but the war is far from over, and bad things still will happen. So that for me was a calamity of soul, because really in this country, that's what we are. We are a calamity of souls. Things are happening all the time. We collide with each other. Bad things happen. Good things happen. We take a step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah.
That's just where we are. And if you understand that, I think you have a better chance to actually move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way you wrote that book, David, you talked about you started drafting in a journal. Was that a departure from the way you usually write, like for the more dialogue and action heavy To Die For?
Yeah, it was, because I like to tell people I think much better in cursive.
Yeah, that's
I do too. I
funny.
like to draft longhand in cursive.
See, I actually can't read it when I write it in cursive. Like afterwards, I'm like, what did I write down? So I can't do it that way.
You're a lot younger, so that's why.
Oh no, I can read cursive. I just have terrible handwriting.
No, well, I for one, I knew this book was going to be a long haul. This is not going to be a 6 months and done. This is going to be a years long process, and I wanted it to have that substance, I guess, of having by the pen on the paper and going through and allow me to cross out marginalia and put stuff in. It just seemed important enough that I wanted to do it in that manner. I'm a marginalia kind of nut. I mean, I tell people, when you go to the Library of Congress in DC, they have all the founding documents on digitized formats, and you go to these kiosks and you pull up the Declaration of Independence, and then you can hit a button and it shows all the marginalia corrections and additions, deletions done by the founding fathers. So in the Declaration of Independence, you see there were 3 words that Jefferson used to describe a certain thing. And you see a line struck through it, and then a little caret, and then 1 word was added, and it was inalienable rights, which is probably the most famous word in the Declaration of Independence. And you click on another button, you show that the person who did that addition and correction was Benjamin Franklin. I mean, that stuff just blows me away. Maybe I'm weird, I don't know, but I just love to see the creative process of how something over here becomes this thing over here that has stood the test of time for a quarter of a millennia. So I just felt Calamity was a different book, and I just wanted to write it in a different way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you told the Daily Beast in 2014 that you do not outline, adding, "I'm very much a writer who lets the story develop. I have no idea how the book is going to end. I don't know what my characters are capable of until I spend 100 pages with them." Is that still the way you write, or has your process changed over the years?
Every book is a little bit different. Some books I will sit down and do mini outlines, like MINI outlines.
Okay.
Right now, I'm doing some preliminary work for a couple of books that I want to do, and I'm doing multiple page outlines, but I know at the end of the day, I will use very little of them. It's just the way I'm set up. I've done outlines before, and I've sit down to write it out. I'm like, none of this is working. I'm just not feeling any of this, like over there. So waste of a month's time. Oh, genius. So
we've been there.
We've all been there. But I think sometimes when you go through the process of outlining, what you're trying to do is crystallize in your head the story structure and the narrative drive you want to do, and the characters are going to inhabit it. You're not going to know every single character from day one. You're just not, because some characters come about because you need them to fill something in the story. And when I'm in the middle of the book, my mind, I guess, becomes my outline. I immerse myself in the story such that this is the only important thing I have in existence. So, and I give the analogy of, when I say I love to write in the trenches, here's what I mean. Where do you think Tom Brady, when he played football, where is he the most focused? In practice, where he knows no one's going to lay a finger on him, or in a game where there's 11 really big guys on the other side who want to kill him?
Yeah.
So I think he's going to be more focused and intense in the game. And I feel like when I'm writing the book, I'm in the game. I'm
Yeah,
not
that
doing an
makes
outline
sense.
preparing to write the book. So the decisions I make and the prose that I bring to it and the development of the characters, I have to bring it with everything I have in my being because it really matters now. An outline I can always change. I can always fudge. When I'm writing outline, like, so he's going to do this. Well, I'll figure that out later. He's got to do something here. I'll get to that later. And you just move on. When you're actually writing it, that's not a really good option. That's why when I say immerse, I mean you are living the story. So if
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of an action scene, I am in the middle of an action scene. I know he's got to get out of it. So if I'm Travis Devine, how do I do that? Well, I've been living with this guy for like 250 pages. I've got a pretty good idea how he's going to do it. And I never have gotten that same visceral feeling from an outline.
Ooh, that's interesting. So, listening to how your process unfolds, I'm curious how close to the final draft is your first draft? Like when you finish that first draft because you've been so in it the whole time,
Yeah.
is it pretty much how it's going to be, or do you have to go back in and kind of tinker with it a little bit?
On the story structure, like when I've had the same editor for like 25 books, and he and I are great friends. He's no longer at a publisher. He went to become an agent, but I told my publisher, no, I'm not, I don't want another editor. You just pay
That's
him to keep
awesome.
editing my books. They're like, okay, that's fine, no problem. Um, and he will and I love him, and we're really in sync. And I trust him. He trusts me, which is really, as you both know, it's really important to have an editor where you trust.
Totally.
And almost always I'll get the editorial letter back. We'll have a phone call before, but and there's always little things you had to hit here and there, but almost always he'll say the story framework is absolutely fine. There's no where you have to tear an enormous section out of the book and replace it with something else. It's like dancing around the edges, but dancing around the edges is really important too.
It is.
And
Yeah.
so I take the editing process incredibly seriously. No words that I've ever written is set in stone. I know that he's trying to do the same thing I'm trying to do, which is make the book as good as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
So I usually get through the draft with the story framework and structure pretty
Okay.
well intact. I don't have to
Okay.
go and knock a floor out and rebuild that floor.
Well, that's good. And Mary Kay and I both have, I think, similar relationships with our editors. It's nice to
Yeah.
have been with a consistent editor for many
Yeah.
years. I mean, you really trust them. You trust them with your characters and with your heart and with your story. I think that
Yeah.
really matters, and it shows up on the page.
And we all like accolades and all that, but Mitch, he knows me well enough to know that, and my wife does too. Instinctively, I know where I'm strong in a story,
Yep.
and it's very nice to hear. Oh, I love that piece. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I need to hear where it's shit. I need
Yeah.
to hear where it's not working,
Yep.
where it's not resonating with another reader, them. And my wife has no compunction about telling me that. I mean, let me just tell you that this is crap. You need to go back and work on this. This is not believable. Nobody would do that. And I'm not buying any of it. I'm like, that's great advice. I mean, that's what I need to hear. That's what all writers need to hear. And then you go back and you find out 9 times out of 10 they were absolutely right. Sometimes writers get tunnel vision as well. You're like, I got this story. This is where I want to be. And you forget sometimes about, well, how will another person, not you, who knows everything about the story, how are they going to react to that scene?
Yeah.
Maybe not as well as you thought they would.
Yeah, I always tell when I send my manuscript to my editor, I'm always like, okay, it sucks. Could you possibly unsuck it? So that's the very technical, that's the technical term that we in publishing use.
Yes, technical terms.
Unsuck that, could you please?
Look, that's a t-shirt right there too. So I'm saying we can work with that one.
I love it. All right, David, you also told us in our newsletter this week that the writing gets harder with each book because, quote, you are intimately more aware of how good something can be if you just bleed a little more over every page and every word. I loved that. I think that Mary Kay and I both feel that way too. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I thought that was so well put.
Yeah, because when you're going through the writing process and the editing process, and you see what you started out with and then what you ended with, totally different sorts of thing, and you
Mhm.
realize that this is far better. It's cleaner. It's tighter. It resonates. It's electrifying as opposed to just kind of just being there. So when you've gone through that process so many times as I have, as we all have, you just realize that extra effort means so much. So maybe in the initial draft, maybe you can raise that level, raise it to an A+ game as opposed to an A game. And instead of saying, and one thing that I've tried to do religiously over the years is become far less verbose. Some of my books early on, I used 100 words where if I'd worked a little harder, I could have done it far better in 10 words. And
Mm.
I like to use the example of the greatest political speech in our country's history, which is Gettysburg Address. It was only 360 words long. It took Lincoln 2 minutes to speak it. The guy who spoke before him was a congressman from Pennsylvania. He spoke for 2.5 hours. Nobody knows what the hell that guy said or even
Right.
remembers who he is. But everybody remembers the Gettysburg Address. And I like
Yeah.
to say it was because every word in that address had earned its right to be in there.
Yeah.
And it only earned its right because Lincoln sat down and took the time to make everything perfect. I
Yes.
will never reach perfection. None of us ever will. But I've been writing for most of my life, and I realized that everything that I write, no matter how good I think it can be, can always be better if I work a little bit harder. So that's what I mean when I say you just bleed a little bit more, because I've seen the results of working harder, where it's like I started with this and it ends with this, and you're like, my God, you know,
Yeah.
how did that happen? And how can I do that again even
Yep.
better? So that's what drives me these days.
Always.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, David, after 50 novels, I've done 33 or 34, and you've done more than 50. How do you keep reinventing yourself while staying true to the core of who you are as a writer and what your fans expect from you?
Yeah, so I have never really thought about whether a reader's going to like a book or not. My goal in writing draft is whether I like it or not. I figure if I like it, my readers will probably like it too. And what drives me is that, again, writing books for me doesn't get easier; it actually gets harder because
No,
Yeah.
no.
um, I sit down with everyone and I'm scared to death that I can't bring the magic again. I remember when they were filming Absolute Power, I worked with Bill Goldman, someone on the script, and a guy, legendary screenwriter, had been everywhere, done everything, and we had discussions a lot about writing. And when he said, "Do you zone out a lot?" I said, "I zone out all the time." She goes, "Yeah, I do too. It's probably why I'm no longer married." But um, the best advice he gave me was that when a writer thinks they finally figured out what it takes to be a writer, you've actually lost the edge that you need to be a competent writer. Because he said fear is a great antidote to complacency. He said
Ooh.
every day I wake up and I'm terrified everybody's going to figure out I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And that's how I approach every book. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, but I'm going to work through it and see what we get at the other end.
Great advice.
That actually makes me feel better to hear that you think like that too, because I think I'm writing my, I think, 18th book now, and same thing. Everyone I sit down and think to myself, like, is this going to be the one where the jig is up, like where they all realize I can't write and I don't know what I'm doing?
You're in a good space, Kristin. You're in a good space. Don't worry.
Phew. All right. All right. Now, David, if you'll stick around, we have a little bit more to talk to you about. But first, a few quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
Yeah, for all of you watching and listening, we encourage you to run out and buy your copy of To Die For. The perfect place to do that, you can do this right at home, is in the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You'll be getting the book at a discount and helping to fund our show, which we appreciate, all while supporting our guests and our beloved indie booksellers nationwide.
While you're over there on Bookshop, you can throw a Calamity of Souls in the same basket if you haven't read
Yeah.
it yet. And it's kind of like the two different sides of David Baldacci. We loved it. So we also want to remind you to follow us on Instagram and join our Facebook group, which is more than 250,000 members strong now. When you visit friendsandfiction.com, you can stay up to date about everything we have going on. And you can sign up for the Friends and Fiction Endless Stories on Substack, which is chock full of bonus content.
All right, David, back to you with another question. With more than 150 million copies of your book sold in more than 80 countries worldwide, more than 50 books under your belt, you obviously know a thing or two about being productive and creative in a way that deeply engages readers. Now, a lot of our viewers are aspiring writers or writers in an early stage of their careers. So on their behalf, I'd like to pick your brain and ask you a craft question. What makes a great thriller, or perhaps even more broadly, what makes a great engaging story?
I the advice I would give to someone will lead into the answer to your question. So many people come up to me and say, I think I've got a great story. I work in this field. I know a lot about it. And um, I always ask them a question back. Well, okay, why would you want to write the story then? And they said, well, I really don't love my day job, and I want to try to sell the film rights over the weekend and retire. And
Me
I said,
too. That's
yeah,
how it works.
I
Sure.
know. Um, so my advice would be, don't necessarily write what you know a lot about. Write about something you'd like to know a lot about, because you're going to need a full tank of creative energy to take you through this long slog of writing something, a novel in particular. And you don't want to run out of that halfway through. Um, I always give an example of the book Seabiscuit, Laura Hillenbrand's Seabiscuit. Laura Hillenbrand, when she wrote the book, she had chronic fatigue syndrome, couldn't leave her home, never been to a racetrack, never ridden a horse, but she fell in love with this horse, Seabiscuit, and she learned everything she could about racing and that time period. And she wrote one of the best books that I've ever read, nonfiction book I've ever read. It's because she didn't know a lot about it, but she wanted to know a lot about it. And that passion will raise your prose, your characters, your dialogue, your plots, everything else. So it's to answer directly your question, what makes for an engaging story? I like to start small, and I think that, but I'm giving sort of a promise to the reader that small things lead to enormous things, big things that you will sort of enjoy the ride. So I don't necessarily always try to start out with some boom thing happening. I try to start out with a human being in some type of predicament so that the reader can instantly connect with that person. Now they've got a problem to solve. I get that. That's my life too. And then how are they going to get out of it? And then you see all the visceral elements that might happen to a human being. They might be hurt, they might be embarrassed, they might be ashamed, they might be fired, they might have lost something important to them. And then from those small scale sorts of engagements, human on human, then you build a bigger plot out. One that builds a connection. You're rooting for this person, or maybe you're rooting against that person, but you're building anticipation and curiosity of what's going to happen next in this to get him to where him or her where they need to go. So people want to follow a journey, and you have to give them a reason to follow that journey along. And by having a goal and having challenges in front of that person who you've gotten to know a little bit and maybe are hoping they're going to get through there, then you're more likely to stick with the pages and stick with that story. So you don't have to start with a nuclear explosion where it kills a million people to get someone's attention. I've found when I'm writing novels, the big action scenes take care of themselves because they're exhilarating, exciting, and you're looking forward to writing them or whatever. That's great. That's maybe 20% of a novel. It's the small stage, small scene engagements of people that carry 80% of any narrative. And you have to make sure that you bring your best game during those moments, because those are the threads that stitch the bigger stuff together. If those threads break, nothing else matters. I don't care how good your action scenes are or whatever else your big stuff is in the novel. Nobody's going to care because they're not going to be there anymore. They're going to just chuck the book off to the
Yeah.
side. So the small stuff is actually the main stuff in the novel. That's how you connect people together. That's what I try to do with my novels. Start small and build from there, and then big things can happen for you.
That is so true. Yeah, what a great explanation. All right, David, before we let you go, where can everyone find you on tour and where can we find you online?
Okay, I know nothing about online stuff, but I'm told that I can't live without them. So I'm on davidbaldacci.com. You can go to the wishyouwellfoundation.org. And on the website, it has my Twitter, X, whatever the hell you call it now, handle, my Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff's on there. I know that universe exists. I hope people are having fun. I hear they're not, but that's okay. But that's where you can find me and all those things. And then the tour schedule will be on my website and all sorts of information about that.
Wonderful. David, it was such an absolute pleasure talking with you today. We really appreciate you being so frank and open with us, all the great writing advice. It's just great to hear from you. You're a great writer. I think you're somebody who so many of our listeners and our readers have enjoyed reading over the years. But it's always so nice when a great popular writer is also a very decent soul, as I know you are. So we were really very happy to have you on today to talk about the whole world of David Baldacci.
Well, I appreciate, and what you guys are doing here is fabulous. I couldn't do any of this. Hats off to all of you and your friends in fiction and what you put together. It's not only is it really cool and it gives writers a platform, you're doing a public service because you're bringing readers in, you're uniting a community, and hats off. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
What a kind thing to say. Thanks.
Okay, everybody, be sure to tune in next week. November is going to turn out to be Boys Month for us because on our live show, we're going to welcome Michael Conley, discuss his new novel, The Waiting. That show will air live on the Friends in Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, November 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it will be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, November 22nd.
Thanks again to you, David, for being with us. And thanks to everyone out there. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.